We wish to proceed. We are very privileged this morning, and this is actually a useful run-up to the remarks of Mr. Cohen regarding anti-Semitism. We have the key U.S. official that deals with that scourge on behalf of the U.S. government, and that is the Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, Mr. Elan Carr. The Special Envoy served until recently as a prosecutor, as the Deputy Attorney General, District Attorney of Los Angeles, and even before coming to this position through Jewish organizations, he was a leader in fighting and combating anti-Semitism on U.S. college campuses and around the world. We are privileged and honored to welcome Special Envoy Carr. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Thank you not only for the introduction, but for all of your hard work. And of course, General Gilad, 25 years, Mazal Tov. And thank you for your leadership in ensuring that this conference remains a remarkably important, relevant, and timely policy conference affecting the Jewish people in the State of Israel. To my IDC friends, President Reichman, Jonathan Davis, it's good to be back at Merkaz HaBinTchumi. I have a history here, having been part of the team to help start AEPI here at IDC. And it's an honor that I know we have some students here in the audience, and it's a pleasure to be back here at a university that has been so impactful on the State of Israel. I was appointed to this role as United States Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism only 4.5 months ago. And my appointment could not have come at a more urgent time. Anti-Semitism, as you all know, is on the rise throughout the world, in every region, at an alarming rate. It comes from multiple sources. There's the anti-Semitism of the ethnic supremacist right, there's the anti-Semitism of the anti-Zionist left, and there's the anti-Semitism of radical Islam. Three sources from three extremes that should hate each other more than they hate anything else. And yet they're united in this one overwhelming and unifying hatred of the Jewish people. We see in the manifestations of anti-Semitism attacks on Jews throughout the world, not only in Europe, but in the United States, in places like Brooklyn, in places like Los Angeles, attacks on Jews, vandalism of Jewish property. Of course, we all know what's going on in Western Europe and how dangerous some parts of Western Europe are for the Jewish people. We see textbooks that still today inculcate anti-Semitic hatred in children, which, by the way, is child abuse. In addition to being a threat to the Jewish people and poison to the next generation of kids, it's child abuse. And yet we see it still today among allies. And of course, we see the social media boiling over with anti-Semitic hatred. Now, let me tell you what our operating principles have been. First of all, we won't ignore any region or any part of the ideological spectrum. Jew hatred is Jew hatred, and we've got to fight it, and we have to roll it back, not simply contain it, but roll it back, no matter what ideological clothing it wears. One of the reasons why I never rank kinds of anti-Semitism in terms of its importance or its level of danger is because to rank anti-Semitism, To say the right is worse than the left is worse than the right, is only to provide ammunition to those who weaponize anti-Semitism for political purposes, those who point fingers to the other and say anti-Semitism is a problem not in my camp but in that camp. And that is extremely destructive because, as I will say later, we must stand united against this scourge, as Tommy so properly called it. And so we don't rank anti-Semitism. In fact, my first trip overseas in terms of bilateral visits to countries was to deal with what is known as the problem of the right in Central and Eastern Europe, where there are far-right movements, not in government, I hasten to add, but far-right movements that are openly anti-Semitic, that march in the streets declaring things that we would think would be heard in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. And so that was my first visit, because we don't rank our priorities in terms of combating anti-Semitism. But what I want to talk to you about is the kind of anti-Semitism that is spreading like a metastatic cancer throughout much of the world, certainly in Western Europe, and certainly on the US college campuses. And that is the anti-Semitism that is often called the new anti-Semitism. It's the anti-Semitism that expresses itself in terms of Israel hatred, in terms of anti-Zionism. And while we don't prioritize or rank anti-Semitism in terms of danger, there is no question that this brand of Jew hatred is spreading like a wildfire. It has gone viral. And it's very important that we call it what it is, and that we tear down any supposed distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. This so-called new kind of anti-Semitism is not new at all. In fact, there's nothing new about it. Every manifestation of classic anti-Semitism going back to medieval times is reflected in the same way in this so-called new anti-Semitism. And we can go down the list. Let's look at blood libels. Those medieval blood libels that charged that Jews, absurdly enough, bake matzah with the blood of children. Well, today we have blood libels leveled at the state of Israel, that Israel is committing genocide, that Israel is an apartheid regime, that Israel is infecting, yes, this is heard as well, infecting Palestinian children with lethal viruses. And so blood libels, then and now, nothing new. The rhetoric is nothing new. A Jewish leader in Europe was recently called a dirty Zionist, as though the substitution of that one word might confuse us as to what is actually meant. My own grandfather in Iraq was arrested and thrown in prison. He was charged with a crime, being a Zionist. Not that that should be a crime, but we'll put that aside. In his trial, he professed to defend himself, to say that the accusation that he was distributing Zionist material in a rally in Baghdad could not have been the case because he wasn't in Baghdad. And he said to the judge, "Your Honor, I'll bring witnesses to prove I was in Basra working at the port with the British." The judge said, "You're challenging the accusation against you? For you, 2 extra years in prison beyond the sentence he was already going to receive." So it wasn't really about him distributing pro-Israel material at a rally. It was because he was a Jew. And charging him with Zionism really meant that he was being charged with being a Jew. And so the rhetoric is not new. Nor is it new to delegitimize the Jewish people. Then, in the old anti-Semitism, we were called outsiders, aliens, those who subvert society, the ominous outsiders at once controlling the world and also undermining it. And so today, the delegitimization of the Jew among the countries of the State of Israel, the same formula repackaged. So too is it the same, the obsessive, pathological focus on hatred of the Jewish people. We saw it then, and we see it now in this so-called new anti-Semitism. An American college student gave me a math answer sheet from a math class. I actually still have it. It says, the derivative of such and so, the integral of so-and-so is such and such, as one might expect. And then it says, another day in the occupied Palestinian territories, Zionist forces murdering children. And then it goes back to math. The student who gave me this math answer sheet said to me, in a voice reflecting exhaustion, in math class, I can't even escape this, even in math class. And so the same kind of pathological, sick, obsessive focus on Jew hatred. Another thing that's the same is blaming Jews for the anti-Semitic responses. How many pogroms, how many massacres throughout history was blamed on something Jews did, either actually or fictionally? Sometimes fictionally, baking matzah with the blood of children. But sometimes actually. Even Kristallnacht was blamed on something the Jews did, and here not fictional. No blood and matzah this time, but an actual event, the assassination of a German diplomat by Herschel Greenspan. But just because the Nazis claimed that Kristallnacht was a response to the assassination of a German diplomat doesn't mean we're so gullible as to believe that's the case. We understand that Kristallnacht wasn't a response to anything Jews did, but was a strategy, part of the tactical and strategic aims of Nazi Germany to eliminate the Jewish people. So too, just because Israel hatred is blamed on something Israel does, fictionally or actually, a community built here, a military operation there, doesn't mean that we're so gullible as to believe that that obsessive pathological hatred of the Jew among the countries really is a response to anything Israel does. It's the same old Jew hatred, blaming Jews for the response. And finally, economic isolation. We all have seen the pictures in Gothic script, kauft nicht bei Juden, as brown shirts stood in front of Jewish shops. Well, what is the BDS movement if not that? Buy not from the Jew among the countries. Strangle the state of Israel economically, and thereby accomplish through economic means what no military has been able to accomplish. Blood libels, rhetoric, delegitimization, economic isolation, blaming Jews for the response, and obsessive pathological hatred. It's the same thing. And so there is nothing new about the so-called new anti-Semitism. And when people hate the Jewish state, they are hating the Jewish people. And it will be our message in every capital and on every campus that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, plain and simple, which is why Secretary Pompeo so strongly stated that in front of 18,000 activists at the last AIPAC policy conference. He said, I quote, he said, I'm going to go on the record. By the way, when a member of the cabinet says, I'm going to go on the record, that means he's about to state the policy of the United States. Let me go on the record, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That is the policy of the United States, and those are our marching orders. Now thank you. I applauded as well when he said that. Now let me end with some good news, because we all know the bad news. We all know anti-Semitism is up. We all know that some places have become cauldrons of anti-Semitic activity. We all know that the anti-Israel movement on college campuses has had a profound effect on students. You've seen the studies, you've seen the polls, they're widely publicized. Jews are less supportive today. Jewish students are less supportive today of Israel than ever before. Evangelical Christians are becoming less supportive of Israel because of what is going on campuses. And let me just add one thing, that in the last 4 months I've been on this job, the most disturbing meeting I've had, and that says a lot, because as you can imagine, I have many, but the most disturbing meeting I've had was with a UK Labour MP who walked out of the Labour Party. A very brave woman, not Jewish, walked out of the Labour Party because she said, I will not sit at the same table with anti-Semites. And she told me in a meeting I had, this disaster we have in England all started on the campuses, and we did nothing because they were only students. And then it came into the Labour Party, and we did nothing because it was only the far left fringe. And now they've won, and we've lost, and I no longer have a political party. What a chilling warning that is to us, that when we see anti-Semitic movements on campuses affecting students, that is not something that we can say belongs to the world of students. Not our world, that world. We cannot say that because the effects are measurable and dangerous. But again, amidst all of the bad news that we know so well, there is a lot of good news too. And if I weren't optimistic about our ability not only to fight this fight, but to win this fight, I wouldn't have taken this job. So piece of good news number one is I have the great privilege to represent an administration the likes of which the United States or the State of Israel have never seen. An administration committed in unprecedented fashion to the fight against anti-Semitism, to the protection of the Jewish people throughout the world, and to support for the State of Israel. Never before have we seen something like this. President Trump could not be any clearer about this. And when the President of the United States takes a substantial amount of time during the most visible and important speech he makes all year, the State of the Union address, to talk about fighting anti-Semitism, you know he means it. And when he calls anti-Semitism a vile poison, which he calls it every single time, you know he means it. And when he says, like he said after the massacre at Pittsburgh in the synagogue when Jews were murdered because they were Jews on Shabbat, he said, if you seek the destruction of the Jewish people, we, the United States, will seek your destruction. When the President of the United States makes a promise like that, you know he means it. And Vice President Pence could not be any more supportive of the Jewish people. And National Security Advisor John Bolton, and of course my boss, our great Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, whom Director Cohen just spoke about in his speech, is as passionate as anybody when it comes to supporting the Jewish people in the State of Israel. And I haven't even talked about the Jews in the administration. If we're talking about our amazing ambassador David Friedman or Jared Kushner or Jason Greenblatt, let me tell you, we couldn't have better friends. We, the Jewish people, couldn't have better friends, and the State of Israel couldn't have better friends. So piece of good news number one is this administration is absolutely unequivocal in its concern for the Jewish future and for Jewish safety. And when I go overseas in bilateral visits, which I've already done in 5 countries, and from here I'm flying to the United Kingdom. When I go overseas, it's not just the special envoy on anti-Semitism that they are receiving. They understand and they get it, that my boss and his boss really care. And when the United States really cares, it makes a difference. And so that's very good news. Second piece of good news is that although we have real problems on U.S. college campuses, and although we have an active far right that is violent, the United States of America is still, without question, the most philo-Semitic country in world history. Jews are not tolerated in the United States. Jews are loved in the United States, embraced, cherished, and treasured. One only has to travel, not in the academic centers where there's so much anti-Israel vitriol, but one only needs to travel in Middle America and talk to Americans of all walks of life to see what I mean. I'm a U.S. Army officer. I served in Iraq. And you know, one of the great things about the Army, as you know, is it brings everybody together. Rich and poor, urban and rural, majorities and ethnic minorities, all together. And I can tell you that the affection Americans have, average Americans have, for the Jewish people and the state of Israel is heartwarming, and it's miraculous. It is no coincidence that the most powerful country in the history of the world is also the most philo-Semitic. It's no coincidence. Some might say it's metaphysical and biblical. Others might simply say that it's a matter of values, that the values on which the United States is based and that has made the United States the power that it is are values that obligate philo-Semitism. But for whatever reason, it is a fact, and that's piece of good news number 2. And finally, piece of good news number 3 is that there are a great many leaders around the world who genuinely get this. Perhaps because anti-Semitism has boiled over and has become such an open and notorious and pressing and urgent problem that leaders at every rank, from heads of state and government to ministers to parliamentarians to local and regional leaders, are standing up and saying, we have got to fight this. In Europe, how can this be? 75 years after the crematoria have cooled, how can this be happening here? And they really get it. And they really understand that anti-Semitism and the fight against anti-Semitism isn't only about protecting Jews. It's about fighting for the future of their societies. And they say that. They say it's about the kind of societies we want our kids to inherit. Now, we can always say we wish there were more, but let me tell you this, there are enough. And so one of my jobs is not only to fight anti-Semites and pressure the recalcitrant, it is also to support with the full weight of the United States, those friends and allies who are fighting the fight and doing right by the Jewish people and by their own societies. My friends, I have no doubt that working together with our allies and our friends, working with all of you, working with the Jewish people and Jewish organizations, working as I have been, b'shituf pe'ula maleh, with the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, ministries and leaders who are doing amazing work in this area, working shoulder to shoulder and arm in arm. We will prevail, and we will roll back this vile poison, as President Trump calls it, this vile poison of anti-Semitism, and build tikkun olam b'malchut Shaddai, and promise for our children and for our grandchildren that future that they so richly deserve. Thank you so very much. Thanks for having me. And thank you for all that you do.